The blood on the white shirt wasn't hers. My loves, it was 1 in the morning when she found him. Naomi Brooks, 27, a black nurse walking home from an overnight rotation, her mother's stethoscope still in her coat pocket, luminous dark skin, tired eyes. A scholarship notice she couldn't afford, waiting on the counter above her aunt's laundromat. Then the alley, a man bleeding against the wall. Korean, tall, a black dragon tattoo climbing the right side of his neck, up from under a torn hospital wristband. A luxury watch on a wrist that gripped hers. "Don't call the cops," he whispered. Her training read everything he tried to hide. Adhesive residue, removed sutures, antiseptic. This man didn't fall. He fled. He ran from somewhere he was never meant to leave. Aigu. One name. That was all he gave her. Taejun. Headlights turned into the alley, and she made a choice she couldn't take back. She didn't know yet whose empire she'd just stepped into. She didn't know his name was already tangled with hers, in a place neither of them had looked. But what she found next, I still don't have the words for it, my loves. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The resident said it loud enough for the whole nurses' station to hear. She flagged a patient for a fall risk that doesn't exist. Again. Naomi Brooks kept her eyes on the chart in her hands. Bed 9. An elderly man, post-op, on a sedative that stacked badly with his blood pressure medication. She had written the flag herself, in her own careful print, because the night before she had watched a man exactly like him try to stand and fold to the floor like an empty coat. "It's the drug interaction," she said, "not the diagnosis." The resident laughed through his nose. He was young, maybe younger than her, with a coat so white it had never touched a real emergency. "You're a student nurse. You read the chart. You don't rewrite it." 2 other residents were watching now. One of them smiled at his shoes. Naomi set the clipboard down on the counter. Slowly, she squared its edge to the laminate, the way her mother used to square papers before a meeting she intended to win. Then she picked up her pen and initialed the flag a second time, pressing hard enough for the ink to bite. "Then leave it in as my note," she said. "If he falls, it's on my name." The resident's smile thinned. He hadn't expected her to sign for it. People who mock you expect you to shrink, and when you don't, they run out of script. He muttered something about attitude and walked off toward the doctor's lounge, his colleagues trailing after him. A hand settled on the counter beside hers. Rings, a thin watch, skin the same warm brown as her own. "He initial that flag, or did you?" Evelyn Carter had come up the corridor without a sound, the way she did everything. White coat open, braids gathered back, glasses pushed up into her hair. She was the only attending on the floor who called Naomi by her first name instead of the student. "I did," Naomi said, twice. Evelyn read Bed 9's chart in about 4 seconds, which was 3.5 more than she needed. Sedative and the pressure med. A good catch. She set the clipboard down. "He's going to be a doctor for another 40 years, and he'll be wrong the whole time, and nobody will ever sign their name under his mistakes, the way you just signed yours. You understand that's not fair." "I understand it." "I didn't ask if you understood it was there." Evelyn looked at her over the rims that weren't in front of her eyes. "I asked if you understood it. There's a difference. Your mother knew the difference." She said it lightly, and then she seemed to hear herself, and something moved behind her face and went still. "Go home, Naomi. You've been on since noon." She went back down the corridor before Naomi could answer, and the answer would have been nothing anyway, because at the sound of her mother in another woman's mouth, Naomi's throat had closed like a hand. The clock over the station read 1:04 a.m. Hanul Hospital ran quiet at that hour. A long white corridor of half-lit rooms and the soft electronic breathing of machines. Naomi finished her rounds without hurrying. She checked bed 9 twice. She refilled a water cup for a woman who couldn't reach it, adjusted a pillow for a man who thanked her in a language she didn't speak, and logged her last vitals at 1:31. In the locker room, she changed nothing except her shoes. The teal scrubs stayed on. She pulled her beige coat over them, buttoned it to the throat, and slid 2 fingers into the left pocket to check for the one thing she checked for every single night before she stepped outside. The stethoscope was there. Small, older than she was. The rubber had gone stiff at the earpieces, and the metal bell had lost its shine to 1,000 hands, and none of that mattered, because it had hung around her mother's neck for 19 years before it hung around nothing at all. Denise Brooks had worn it into rooms full of powerful people and asked the questions those people did not want asked. Then Denise Brooks had died, and the hospital that employed her had produced a file that explained everything and answered nothing, and the file had a name on it that Naomi had never been allowed to see. There had been a phone call, 2 years ago, at an hour like this one, a voice she didn't know, using words that had been chosen by a committee. Sudden complications. Nothing anyone could have done. When Naomi went to collect her mother's things, they gave her a plastic bag and a folder. The folder held a death record, with a section blacked out where the reason should have lived, and a signature line at the bottom, filled with 3 initials she was told she had no standing to question. The bag held a wallet, a pair of reading glasses, and the stethoscope, which the administrator had almost kept, because it was hospital-adjacent property, until Naomi had put her hand flat on the desk and said, in her mother's own even voice, that it was leaving the building with her. She had worn it to every shift since, not for luck, for the opposite of luck, to keep her hands remembering that a chart could kill a person and that somebody, somewhere, had signed for it. Naomi closed her hand around the bell until the cold left it. Then she let go and she went out into the night. The staff exit put her in the alley behind the hospital, the shortcut she took because the front doors meant the bus stop, and the bus meant 40 minutes, and 40 minutes meant she'd reach the room above the laundromat, closer to 3 than to 2. She had a shift again in 14 hours. Sleep was arithmetic now. Everything was arithmetic. The alley smelled of rain that hadn't fully committed, wet brick, a dumpster, a single working bulb over a service door 2 buildings down. Her sneakers were quiet on the pavement. She had walked this stretch 400 times and never once looked up. Tonight, something on the ground made her look down. A shape against the far wall, folded between the dumpster and a stack of broken pallets. At first, she read it as a bag of trash, the way you read anything human as anything else when it's 1 a.m. and you're tired to the bone. Then the shape moved, and a hand came up off the wet concrete, and she saw fingers. Naomi stopped. Every instinct she had trained told her to keep walking. A woman alone, an alley, a body that might be a drunk or a trap or worse. Every instinct she had inherited told her to go closer, because a hand that reaches up is a hand asking, and her mother had never once walked past a hand. She went closer. He was a man, and he was young in the way that took her a second to trust, because the face belonged to someone in his mid-30s, and the exhaustion in it belonged to someone much older. Fair skin, gone gray under the bad light. Black hair, wet, plastered across his forehead in strands. A tailored suit that had cost more than her tuition. The white shirt beneath it darkened down one side in a spreading map she recognized before her brain named it. Blood. His own. A lot of it, and recent. "Sir," she dropped to a crouch, knees on the wet ground, the coat forgotten. "Can you hear me?" His eyes opened, dark and startlingly focused for a man in his condition. They found her face and stayed on it. Don't. His voice was a rasp with an accent under it. Don't touch the phone. She was already reaching for it. She stopped, but only because stopping bought information. Her other hand found his wrist to take a pulse, and that was when the reading started. The automatic clinical read she couldn't switch off if she tried. His pulse was fast and thin, fine, expected, but her fingers, closing on his wrist, hit something that didn't belong, a band. She turned his hand over into the light. A hospital wristband, torn. Not cut by scissors at the seam, the way discharge did it, but ripped. The plastic stretched white and split. There was adhesive residue on the back of his hand, in two neat squares, where tape had held something down and been pulled away in a hurry. IV site. And when her eyes went up his forearm to the crook of his elbow, she found the puncture, and above it, along the side, a line of skin that had been closed and then opened again. Sutures, removed, not by a doctor. She looked at the collar of his shirt. Antiseptic. That sharp, clean, orange-brown smell that lived in one place and one place only. This man had not been in a fight in a bar. This man had been in a bed, wired to monitors, under someone's care, and he had gotten up out of that bed and pulled the care out of his own body and run until he couldn't run. He had fled a facility. She catalogued the rest the way she'd been trained to catalog a trauma, top to bottom, fast, so nothing hid. The blood down his side wasn't arterial. It welled instead of pumped, which meant she had minutes and not seconds, which meant she could think. Under the torn shirt, she found the source without looking, her fingertips reading the ridge of a wound that had been stitched clean by someone who knew how, and then reopened by someone who didn't care. The edges were wrong. Sutures don't tear on their own. Sutures tear when a body is dragged, or when a body drags itself. There were older marks, too. Faint, round bruises on the inside of the other arm, the kind a blood pressure cuff leaves when it's run again and again for days, and on his chest, when her hand brushed it, 3 small squares of adhesive gone tacky, monitoring leads peeled off. Whoever had him had wanted his heart on a screen, and he had torn the screen off his own skin and crawled out here to bleed in the dark, rather than let them keep watching it. Naomi's mouth had gone dry. She was aware, distantly, that she had stopped breathing for a moment. "Someone did this to you," she said. It wasn't a question. His hand moved before she saw it move. Cold fingers closed around her wrist, the one reaching for her phone, and the grip was weak, and it was absolute at the same time, the grip of a man spending the last of something. "Don't call the cops," he said. "You need a hospital. You're 20 feet from one." "Not that one." The words came out flat and certain, and something in them made the hair rise on her arms. "The ambulance takes me to their hospital." "There, not a hospital, theirs." He said it the way you'd say the name of a room you'd already died in once. She should have pulled her wrist free. She should have stood up, walked to the mouth of the alley, and dialed 3 numbers that were designed for exactly this. That was the whole of her training, and the whole of the law, and the whole of common sense, standing together and pointing the same way. She thought about a file with a name on it she'd never been allowed to see. She thought about a hospital that produced answers that answered nothing. She thought, this man is afraid of the same thing I've been afraid of for 2 years, and neither of us can name it. His grip on her wrist had loosened without letting go, the way a drowning man's hand loosens when he decides to trust the person who reached him. She turned her wrist inside his fingers, slowly, until instead of him holding her, she was holding him, her thumb across the back of his cold hand, over the 2 squares where the tape had been. "Listen to me," she said, low, even, the voice her mother used in rooms she meant to win. "If I walk to that street and dial, an ambulance comes, and it takes you where the law says to take you. You already told me where that is, so I'm not going to dial." Something crossed his face that she would only understand later. Not gratitude, closer to fear. As if a stranger declining to hand him over was itself a thing worth being afraid of. "But I need one true thing," she said, "before I decide what I'm doing with the rest of tonight. Not who did it, not why, just one." She waited until his eyes found hers again. "Are you the kind of man they should be looking for?" His jaw worked. The answer took everything he had left, and it came out as 3 syllables in his own language before he found the English, and she caught both. "I used to be," he said. It was not a yes and it was not a no, and it was, she would think afterward, the only answer that would have made her stay. A yes she wouldn't have believed, a no she'd have believed even less. "What's your name?" she asked. His eyes were sliding half shut. It took him a moment to climb back up to them. "Taejun," he said. Just that, one name, offered like the only coin left in a pocket. Light bloomed at the far end of the alley. Headlights, 2 of them, wide set and high, swinging in off the street and steadying as the car turned to face down the alley's throat. It didn't move yet. It sat there, engine low, the way a car sits when the people in it are deciding. Naomi went flat against instinct and low against the pallets in the same motion, her body making the choice before her mind ratified it. Taejun's breath hitched. She felt him try to gather himself to move and felt how little was left to gather. The car crept forward, slow. A search speed, not a passing speed. "Can you stand?" she breathed. "No." "Then you're going to—" There was a service door 8 feet away, the one under the dead bulb, and she knew it because she'd propped it open 100 summer nights when the locker room turned to a furnace, a storeroom, cleaning supplies, folded gurneys, boxes of gloves, staff access only, and the latch had been broken since spring. She got her shoulder under his arm. He was heavy in the specific dead way of a body that has stopped helping, and the blood made her hand slip against his side, and she planted her sneakers and drove up through her legs, the way you're taught to lift a patient and not your spine. He came off the wall with a sound bitten off behind his teeth. The headlights swept the dumpster. They crossed the pallets. 8 feet became 4, became the door, and she hit the broken latch with her hip and it gave, and the dark of the storeroom swallowed them both, as the beams painted the wall where he'd been lying, right across the smear his blood had left on the brick. She eased him down behind a stack of boxes and put her body between him and the sliver of light at the door's edge, and her hand flat over his mouth, not to silence him, he was past making noise, but to feel the breath still coming. The beams held on the wall. Somewhere in the car a window came down. She heard the soft electric whir of it, then nothing, then a man's voice speaking low and unhurried in Korean. She didn't have all the words. She had enough. He was telling someone he saw blood. He was telling someone the blood went to the door. Under her hand, Taejun's lips moved. He was answering the voice in his head, or praying, or counting. She couldn't tell, but she pressed down a fraction harder, and he went still, and she felt him understand, even most of the way gone, that the woman holding his mouth shut was the only thing between him and the car. Tires rolled past outside, slow, slower. A pause, long enough that she counted her own heartbeat to 9. Then the car moved on, and the engine climbed, and the sound of it thinned out toward the street, and was gone. Naomi did not move for a full minute. In the dark, her eyes adjusted enough to find the shape of him against the boxes, the wet shine of the shirt, the pale blur of his face turned toward her. "They're looking for you," she said. "Yes. Who are they?" He didn't answer. His head had tipped back against the cardboard, and his eyes were closed, and for one white instant, she thought she'd lost him right there on the storeroom floor. She pressed 2 fingers under his jaw. The pulse was there, thready, and there. She pressed the flat of the stethoscope's bell to his chest without thinking, an old reflex reaching for a familiar tool, and in the storeroom quiet, she found the heartbeat with her own ears, the way her mother had taught her before she could spell the word for it. Fast, uneven, but climbing back, not falling away. Whatever he'd lost, he had a little more time than his face was telling. She sat back on her heels in the dark, her mother's stethoscope a small hard weight against her hip, her scrubs wet through at the knees, her hands red in a light too dim to see red. 14 hours until her next shift. A scholarship notice on a kitchen counter across the city, printed in red, the word overdue where a signature should go. An aunt asleep above a laundromat who would kill her for this, and a mother 2 years in the ground who would never once have walked past a hand. Naomi looked at the man breathing on the floor of a room she wasn't supposed to be in, hiding from people she couldn't name, wearing the smell of a hospital that had let him bleed. She reached up and eased the broken latch back into place, so the door read as shut. She pulled a folded gurney sheet from the nearest box and pressed it to his side, guiding his own hand over it, teaching his fingers where to hold. She checked the seam of light at the door once more, and found it empty. And in the doing of these small, ordinary things, the shaking in her hands quieted, because her hands had always known what her mind was still arguing about. There was a name on a death record she had never been allowed to read. There was a system somewhere that turned people into blacked-out lines and told their daughters they had no standing to ask. And there was a man on the floor in front of her who had torn the wires out of his own body to escape the exact machinery she had been circling for 2 years, who spoke the language of the initials on that page, who had run and bled and landed, of all the alleys in the city, in hers. She was too tired to call it fate. She was too much her mother's daughter to call it chance. "Okay, Taejun," she said, very quietly, to no one who could hold her to it. "Okay." Outside, the rain finally made up its mind and came down. The rain lasted 40 minutes. Naomi counted it in Taejun's pulse, the way she'd once counted her mother's on nights the fever came up. His heartbeat climbed and steadied, until the irregular skips came further apart. She kept the sheet pressed to the wound. She kept her back to the door. When the water finally thinned to a drip off the loading dock above them, she heard the second car. Not the same engine. This one idled cleaner, expensive. A low German hum that didn't belong to a hospital service road at 2 in the morning. Doors opened, 2 of them, then a third, slower, a man who took his time getting out because he wanted whoever was watching to know he had the time. Taejun's hand found her forearm. His grip had strength in it now that it hadn't had an hour ago. That frightened her more than the weakness had. "Joan Ho," he breathed. "You know him. He works for the house." His jaw moved against her palm. "He is careful. He will check the doors." Naomi looked at the broken latch she'd set back into its housing. It would hold to a glance. It would not hold to a hand. She eased Taejun deeper behind the crates, guided his fingers to the sheet, and stood. She smoothed her coat. She pulled the low bun tighter, tucked the loose strands, straightened the ID badge on her chest so the university logo faced out. She became, in 4 seconds, exactly what she was on paper. A student nurse leaving a shift. Nothing under the sentence. Then she opened the storeroom door from the inside and stepped out into the wet alley like she'd every reason to. The man by the German car turned first. He was built square, graphite suit soaked dark at the shoulders, a thin scar cutting through the arch of his right brow. He didn't reach for anything. He simply looked at her the way you look at a variable you haven't solved yet. "Miss." His English was clean, unhurried. "You work here?" "Night rotation." She let her voice come out tired, because it was. "Just finished. 12 hours." She pulled the coat tighter. You lost? We're looking for a man. He watched her face while he said it, hunting for the flicker. Korean. Injured. He may be confused. He walked out of a private care facility tonight. His family is very worried. Confused how? He isn't well. A pause. He needs medication. Without it, he can be a danger to himself. Naomi had signed her name under a false chart once already that night, in the other direction, refusing to let a lie stand over a patient. She recognized the shape of this one instantly. She'd heard the same music from families who wanted a relative kept, dosed, quiet, danger to himself. The phrase people reached for when the truth was danger to us. That's a hard thing, she said, and let a nurse's practice sympathy come up into her voice, the kind she gave families in waiting rooms at 3 a.m. For the family, I mean. It is. I didn't see anyone, she said. But I came out the front and around. You want the security desk, it's the main lobby, other side of the building. They've got the camera feed for this whole block. It was the one thing she was sure they wouldn't do. Whatever this was, it did not want a camera feed with a name attached to it. The scarred man, Junho, held her eyes a moment longer. Behind him, the third man had come around the car. Older, softer in the middle, a worn leather briefcase clutched to his chest like a life vest, rectangular glasses catching the one working alley light. He did not look like muscle. He looked like a man who had been brought along, not sent. The camera, Junho repeated. Main lobby. She shifted her weight toward the mouth of the alley, toward the street, toward light. I'd hurry, if he's really not well, in this rain. She let it hang. For a breath, she thought it wouldn't work. Then Junho gave a short nod, the nod of a professional filing her under later, and said something low in Korean to the man with the briefcase. Naomi caught 3 words. Servers. Friday. The old one. She kept her face empty. She kept walking, out past the German car, out to the street, and she turned toward the laundromat like a woman going home, and she did not look back until the corner took the alley from view. Then she pressed her spine to the wet brick and let herself shake, once, hard, and got it over with. She did not go home. She went around the block, through the parking structure, back to the service door from the far side. Taejun had moved. He'd dragged himself up against the crates, the sheet dark and heavy in his fist, and when the door opened, his other hand had already closed around a length of steel shelving bracket. He lowered it when he saw her. They're gone, she said. For now. What did you tell them? To check the cameras. She crouched in front of him. They didn't want to check the cameras. Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise, confirmation. He let his head fall back against the wood, and for the first time she saw the whole of his face in the working light, and she understood she was in trouble of a different kind than she'd counted on. She'd seen this face, not this man. This face, the cut of it, the family stamp of it, on the glossy quarterly report that sat in the hospital's donor lobby, under glass, next to a plaque thanking a foundation for the new cardiac wing, the same jaw, the same brow, a dynasty that had bought its name onto 3 floors of the building she worked in. And there was the mark she hadn't let herself read in the dark, high on the right side of his neck, climbing out from under the blood-stiffened collar, the head of a black dragon. Han, she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. Han Taejun. The name came out of her slowly, the way you set something heavy on a table you're not sure will hold. The hospital called itself Hanul, Sky, and half of what she'd learned inside it had been paid for by the family whose son was bleeding on her storeroom floor, hiding from his own house. You know the name, he said. Everyone who works in that building knows the name. It's on the wall by the elevators. She stayed crouched, close, so she could watch his pulse in his throat. The kind of family that owns a hospital doesn't lose a son in an alley. So you tell me the true thing now. All of it. Or I open that door and I flag down your Mr. Junho myself. She wouldn't have. They both knew the wound made the threat empty, but she needed to see what he did with it. What he did was tell her. My grandfather built the company, he said. My father built the rest. When he died, the board wanted a name they trusted on the door. They chose me, a breath. Some of them regret it. Some of them just put you in a private clinic and reported you confused. His mouth almost moved, not a smile, the memory of where one used to go. You listen well. I listen for a living. She sat back on her heels. What were you in that clinic for? A wound. He touched the sheet. This one. 10 days ago, it was clean. It was healing. His hand flattened against his side. Someone reopened it. Someone kept me asleep more than I should have been asleep. When I woke tonight, the room was not a hospital room. It was a room made to look like one. He looked at her. So I took the window. Naomi thought of the adhesive squares, the pressure cuff bruising in a row, the sutures parted by something that wasn't a scalpel and wasn't an accident. Her training had already told her most of this in the dark. Hearing him say it only closed the circuit. Who? She said. That is the question I climbed out a window to answer. You have a company full of people who work for you. She kept her voice level. A man like you doesn't run out a window. He makes a phone call. Every phone in that building answers to the same house. His hand tightened on the sheet. And tonight, I learned I no longer know which rooms of the house are mine. He turned his head to the wall, and when he spoke again, it was quieter. So I called no one. I walked. And I fell into the one alley in this city where the person who found me chose not to sell me. I still might, she said. No. He looked back at her. You already didn't. She stood. She paced the 2 steps the storeroom allowed and turned. She was doing arithmetic now, the cold kind, the kind that had kept her alive through 2 years of a life that kept trying to close over her head. This man needed something. Men like this always needed something, and they only ever showed you the wound when the need was bigger than the pride. Here's how this goes, she said. If it goes at all, you don't get to run. You can't. That wound opens up right, and you bleed out behind a laundromat, and I'm the last name on your chart, and I have worked too hard for my name to end it as a footnote to yours. She held up one finger. No armed men. Not Junho, not anyone. They come near me or my family, we're done. And I take everything I've seen straight to the people who'd love to know a Han went missing from his own clinic. A second finger. You need care. It goes through one person. Dr. Evelyn Carter. She decides what's safe. Not you, not me. She makes the medical calls. Nobody else on this earth touches you. A third. And when this is over, when you have your answer and your throne, and whatever it is you people keep in those buildings, you get me into the system. He watched her. What system? Your records. The whole buried spine of it. Every file the name Han ever paid to make disappear. Her voice didn't rise. It went the other way, down, to the flat, still place under everything. 2 years ago, my mother died in a building your family's money runs through. The death certificate came back with the cause blacked out and 3 initials on the signature line, and I was told, very politely, by very expensive people, that I was not to ask again. She let the light hold on her face. I've been asking anyway, quietly, for 2 years. You want my hands to keep you alive, Mr. Han? Then your reach is going to open a door for mine. For a long moment, the alley dripped, and the far-off street hissed with a passing car, and Han Tae-jun looked at the woman who'd carried him through a broken door, and something in the arithmetic behind his own eyes came out to a number he hadn't expected. Your mother's name, he said. Denise Brooks. She was watching his face when she said it. She would remember, later, that nothing in it moved, that the stillness was too complete, too clean. The stillness of a man holding a thing very carefully so it wouldn't ring. At the time she read it as a stranger hearing a stranger's name. "I'll get you your door," he said. "Swear it on something that costs you." "On the company." He said it without hesitation, and she believed the weight, even if she didn't yet believe the man. "Get me to your Dr. Carter." Evelyn Carter did not ask why. That was the first thing about her that mattered that night. She met them at 4 a.m. at a shuttered urgent care 2 neighborhoods over. One she still held a key to from a clinic she'd run before Hanul, and she took one look at the man on the folded-down seat of Loretta's borrowed van, and her face closed into the flat competence of someone who had decided to be angry later. She cut the shirt away herself. She laid out the field under a work lamp, and when she got the dressing off and put the light on the wound, she went quiet in a way Naomi had learned, over 2 years, to be afraid of. "Naomi," Evelyn didn't look up. "Come look. Tell me what you see." Naomi bent to the light. The wound ran along the lower ribs, and it should have been 10 days healed, and it wasn't, because the edges told a story her training read like print. The original cut had gone clean and been closed well, a surgeon's work. Then, days later, someone had opened it again, not along the incision, but across it, deliberate, the way you'd score a seal you meant to break. Fresh suture removed, the tissue around it swollen with something that hadn't come from the injury. "This didn't reopen," Naomi said. "Somebody reopened it. Somebody who knew exactly how." Evelyn's jaw worked. And look at his eyes. Look at the pupils. She lifted Taejun's chin with 2 gloved fingers. "You've been oversedated for days, honey. Somebody's been keeping you under a therapeutic threshold that had nothing to do with pain control and everything to do with keeping you quiet." She peeled off a glove. "You didn't walk out of a hospital. You walked out of a holding cell with a saline drip." Taejun's good hand had gone to the plastic band still cinched around his other wrist, the torn hospital wristband. He'd worn it out of the clinic like the only thing he'd been allowed to keep. "This," he said, "it is not the hospital's." Naomi took his wrist. In the alley, she'd read the band as generic, a patient ID gone to garbage. Now, under Evelyn's lamp, she saw the printing had no hospital header. No name, just a code, a run of letters and digits, and below it, small, a single word in the machine print they used for internal systems. She read it 3 times before it meant anything. "Haidam," she said aloud. Evelyn's head came up. "What did you say?" "It's printed here, under the barcode." Naomi turned the band toward the light. "Haidam." Then a string. HDM, then numbers, then, she stopped. Because she knew that word. She had seen that word exactly once, in her mother's small, precise handwriting, on a legal pad Naomi had found in a box of Denise's things, and had never been able to make sense of. A page of notes toward the end, a word underlined twice, with a question mark, in her mother's hand. Haydam. Naomi had spent a year assuming it was a person, a name, a Korean colleague. It had never once occurred to her it was a system. Naomi. Evelyn had gone very still. "Sit down." "I'm fine." "You are not fine. Your hands are shaking on my patient." Evelyn came around the table, took the wristband gently out of Naomi's fingers, and read it herself, mouth moving. "This is a records protocol. This coding, I've seen the shape of it. It's how a hospital chart references an off-system file. A shadow chart. Something that lives where the audit can't reach it." She looked up at Taejun. "Do you know what Haydam is?" For the first time all night, Han Taejun looked like a man who was afraid. "It is a project inside my company," he said slowly. "Records management, compliance. I signed off on funding it 4 years ago. I never..." He stopped. His hand closed. "I was told it archived old files. Nothing more." It archives them, all right, Evelyn said. Somewhere, nobody can subpoena. She set the band down. And it just told the two of us that whoever's been keeping you asleep isn't improvising. This is old, this is built. This has a name and a budget, and it's been running for years. 4 years, Taejun said. I signed the funding 4 years ago. Then somebody's been feeding on it 4 years. Evelyn threaded a fresh suture, her hands steady even as her voice was not. You gave them a room with no windows, and told yourself it was a filing cabinet. That's how these things always start, honey. Somebody respectable signs a clean-looking line. Naomi stood in the cold light with her mother's word ringing in her chest like a struck glass, and understood that the door she'd bargained for was not at the end of this story. It was the whole story. It had always been the story. The blacked-out cause of death, the 3 initials, the polite, expensive people, the flag she'd signed her name under at 1 a.m. to keep a stranger from dying of somebody else's laziness. All of it ran back to a single buried spine, and she was holding a piece of it in her hand, printed on a plastic band she'd cut off a Mafia boss in an alley. Evelyn, she said. My mother wrote this word down before she died. Evelyn Carter looked at her for a long moment. Then she pulled her glove back on, hard, and turned to the wound. Then, we do this right, she said, and we do it quiet. Because if this is what it looks like, honey, the people who buried your mother's file just found out somebody's still reading it. She tied off the last suture and cut the thread close. 5 hours ago, you flagged a chart nobody wanted flagged, she said, not looking up. Denise did the same thing once. Signed her name under a number that didn't add up, and then she went looking for where the number came from. Her hands stilled. I never knew what she found. I only knew she stopped being able to sleep. She stripped the gloves. Now I'm looking at the word she wrote down, printed on a plastic band, on a man she never met. Evelyn met Naomi's eyes. So no, we do not run, we read. Across the city, in a room 40 floors up where the rain-streaked glass that overlooked a skyline of fallen stars, Dr. Han Soo-jin set down a phone she had listened to without speaking. Junho's report had told her only that the alley was empty, and the nurse had said the cameras. Empty was a problem. Empty meant walking. She opened a folder on the desk. Inside, 3 sheets of letterhead, 3 signatures already in place beside her own. 3 physicians of standing, willing to attest that Han Tae-jun was medically incapable of executing the duties of his office. She squared the pages. She checked the date. Under the company's charter, an incapacity finding by 3 doctors opened a window. 5 days. In 5 days, if the chairman could not appear before the board in sound condition to answer it, the presidency passed by default to the next signatory of record. She had built the finding to be airtight. She had built the timeline to be short. She reached for her pen, and beside the topmost signature she wrote the day, and the day was Sunday, and the vote would fall on Friday. 5 days. She capped the pen. She had accounted for everything except a student nurse who signed her own name under other people's mistakes, and a wristband that should have been burned. The laundromat opened at 6, and Loretta was already folding when Naomi came down the back stairs. Sunday light lay flat across the machines. Loretta didn't ask why her niece had been out all night, or why there was a man's blood dried in a thin line along the cuff of her coat. She set down a bath towel, smoothed it once, and looked at Naomi the way she looked at a load that had come out wrong. You found something, Loretta said. I found someone. Loretta nodded slowly, as if that were the same thing. She went to the counter, opened the register drawer that never held more than starting cash, and reached under the till. Her hand came back with a small brass key on a loop of kitchen twine. Then I have to give you the box. Naomi stopped. What box? The one your mother mailed me the week before she died. Told me not to open it. Told me if you ever came asking questions with that look on your face, I'd know it was time. Loretta held out the key. You've got the look. The storage room behind the dryers smelled of lint and old detergent. On a shelf above the folding table sat a cardboard box taped twice around, Denise's handwriting on the top in permanent marker. Not a name, just a date. 2 years old. Naomi lifted it down with both arms. It weighed less than she expected. She set it on the table and cut the tape with a lint scraper. Inside, a color chart, a printed audit legend, the kind hospitals use to code chart review passes. Green for verified, amber for flagged, red for escalated. Denise had written her own key in the margin. Small block letters, a second column of meanings beside the official one, and under the chart, a folded page of handwritten codes, strings of letters and numbers, grouped in threes, the same shape as the code on Taejun's torn wristband. Naomi laid the wristband on the table beside the page, her mother's column, the pattern lined up on the third try, HDM, then a run of digits, then a letter that told you which shelf of the shadow system a record lived on. Denise hadn't been guessing. Denise had built the key. "Aigu," Naomi breathed, not to anyone. Taejun and Evelyn came from the closed urgent care an hour later, in Loretta's borrowed van. Taejun moving like a man holding his own ribs together, which he was. Evelyn carried a laptop that had never touched a hospital network. She had spent the morning pulling what she could reach through an old research login that still worked, because no one had thought to kill it. Fragments. Enough to know the door was real, not enough to open it. Naomi put the box between them on the folding table. "My mother made the key," she said, 2 years ago, before any of you knew her name. Evelyn's hands went still over the laptop. She looked at the color chart for a long moment, and something crossed her face that wasn't surprise. It was recognition. She asked me once what the amber code meant in a system that didn't have an amber code, Evelyn said quietly. I thought she was tired. I told her to go home. They worked through the afternoon, with the shades drawn and the open sign turned to closed. Loretta ran the machines anyway, empty, so the block would hear the same Sunday hum it always heard. Evelyn typed the decryption strings by hand, one group at a time, Denise's column open beside the keyboard. The work was slow because it had to be exact. One character off and the string returned nothing. No error, no warning, just a clean, empty field, the system's way of pretending there had never been anything to find. Denise had understood that. Her marginal notes carried little corrections in a second ink, places where she had gone back and fixed her own key after testing it. Third digit reads as O, not 0. Skip the hyphen on the amber run. A woman teaching a daughter she hadn't met yet how to open a door in the dark. Naomi read the notes aloud so Evelyn could type without looking away. Her mother's voice came through them in a register Naomi hadn't heard in 2 years. Not the soft one from the recordings, the working one, the one that flagged a bad number at midnight and signed under it. She kept her own voice steady on the words. Steady was the only way to get through them. The first file resolved a little after 2. It was a patient ledger that did not exist in any hospital of record. Names, admission dates, medication logs, and beside each entry, a second set of numbers that didn't match the first. A real chart, and the chart they showed the auditors. Hatem wasn't storage. Hatem was the drawer where you kept the true version while you handed out the lie. Taejun read over Evelyn's shoulder, and Naomi watched the color leave his face by degrees. He had approved this. He had signed a budget line 4 years ago for a records management project that archived old files, and the archive had teeth he was never shown. Keep going, he said. Evelyn kept going. The files stacked. A pattern surfaced. A small set of patients, whose real charts and false charts diverged not in billing, but in outcome. People the record said, recovered. People the true version said, did not. The seventh file carried a suppression sign-off. Every altered record in Hatem required one, an authorization to freeze the true version and release the false. A signature line, 3 initials, stamped, the way a hospital stamps an order it wants to look routine. HTJ. Naomi's hand found the edge of the table. She had seen those 3 letters exactly once before, on a death record with the cause blacked out, on a signature line she had been forbidden to question. She had carried them in her chest for 2 years, like a stone she couldn't name. Now they sat on a screen in her aunt's storage room, at the bottom of a lie about someone else's mother, in the same order, in the same hand of authority. She turned to look at the man beside her. Han Tae-jun, HTJ. The room went very quiet. Even the empty machines seemed to hold their turn. "Say it," Naomi said. Her voice came out level. Level was worse than loud, and everyone in the room knew it. Tae-jun didn't reach for the easy version. She would give him that later, alone, when she was honest with herself. He didn't say, "It isn't what it looks like." He put both hands flat on the table, the signet ring clicking once against the wood, and he told her the truth in the order it happened, which was the only mercy he had left to offer. 4 years ago, a woman inside the company brought me a number that didn't close, he said, a patient account. A settlement that had been paid without a claim. I told her to open it. I authorized the investigation. He breathed, and the breath cost him. Her name was Denise Brooks. The stone in Naomi's chest turned over. I gave her access. I gave her a budget and a name to report to. I thought I was cleaning my own house. His jaw worked. The name she reported to routed through Hatem. I didn't know that then. I know it now, because I've been reading the same files you have, and the sign-off that killed her investigation carries my initials on a stamp I never pressed. You authorized it, Naomi said. I authorized. Her. Not this. His eyes came up. I never touched your mother, Naomi. I would tell you if I had. I authorized the door she walked through. Someone else was standing on the other side of it. When did you know my name? The question landed in the middle of the room and stayed there. Tae-jun was silent for the length of one machine's cycle winding down. The first night, he said. Evelyn stopped typing. In the alley. You said Brooks when you told the men your badge name. I heard it before I passed out, and I heard it again when you said Denise Brooks at the clinic, and I let you keep talking because I needed your hands, and I was afraid that if I said what I knew, you'd take them back. He didn't look away from her while he said it, which took more from him than the wound had. That was the coward's arithmetic. I made it anyway. Naomi thought of his face going still at the urgent care when she'd said her mother's name, the stillness she'd read as a stranger hearing a stranger's name. She had stood there and handed him her grief, and he had held it and said nothing. You let me tell you, she said. You let me tell you what they did to her while you already knew you were on the paperwork. Yes. One word. No softening after it. She almost preferred the silence. She turned it over, the whole shape of the last 2 days, and saw it reform into something uglier than she'd carried into the room, the night in the alley, the condition she had set. When you have your power, you put me in the system to find the truth about my mother. Offered to a man who had already recognized the name attached to that truth, she had bargained for access to a file with the very hand that had, on paper, sealed it. He had let her think she was buying something he already knew she would find written against him. I built the whole alliance on that promise, she said. You knew the promise was hollow before I finished making it. The promise wasn't hollow. His voice stayed low. I meant to open every drawer in that building for you. I still do. I just knew what you'd find in one of them, and I let you walk toward it blind because a blind partner was easier to keep than an honest one." He looked at the box. "That's the part I don't get to take back." "No," Naomi said. "It isn't." Loretta had come to stand in the storage room doorway with a folded sheet pressed to her chest. She looked at Taejun the way she'd looked at the wrong load that morning. She said nothing, because it wasn't her turn, but she moved so that she stood a half step nearer to her niece. Naomi picked up the wristband. She set it back down. She looked at the color chart her mother had drawn in the last clear week of her life. The amber column, the meanings written for a daughter she must have hoped would never need them. "Here is what happens now," Naomi said. Taejun waited. "The alliance is over." Evelyn's head came up. Taejun's did not move. "You get your power back on your own," Naomi went on. "You go to your board and your building, full of phones that answer the same house, and you fight for your chair. And I hope you win it, because a woman upstairs from you built a system that puts the true chart in a drawer, and I would rather she lost. But you fight it without me. I am not the hands that clear your name. Not while your initials are on my mother's. They're forged," Taejun said. "Then prove it without me holding the light for you." She gathered the pages. "Because right now, the only difference between you and Han Soo-jin is that you're bleeding, and bleeding isn't the same as clean." He absorbed it. He was a man who had spent a lifetime learning to absorb things without letting them show, and for the first time since the alley the training failed him, something moved behind his eyes and he let it. He didn't argue. Arguing would have been another version of managing her, and he had run out of the right to manage her. "What will you do with the files?" he asked. "What my mother couldn't." Naomi turned to Evelyn. She made copies onto a drive Evelyn had brought clean from her own drawer at home, one that had never seen Dahan log in. She copied the ledgers, the sign-off pages, the color key, the decoded strings. She copied the file with the 7th sign-off, the one with 3 initials, twice. "You're the only person in this room the board can't call a liar," Naomi told her. "You've never taken their money. You caught a med error at 1 in the morning in a hospital they built, and you flagged it anyway. If this comes out through you, it comes out clean." Evelyn took the drive. She held it in her palm and looked at it like it weighed more than it did. "Denise gave me the same look you're giving me," she said. "The night she asked about the Amber Code, I sent her home. I'm not sending you home. I know." She'd have wanted the copy in a second pair of hands. Evelyn slid the drive into an inner pocket, the one with a button, and pressed the button closed. "It's in 2 now." Taejun stood. It took him a moment to get vertical, and no one helped him, and he didn't ask. He looked at the box, at the color chart, at the woman who had built a key to a door that killed her, and then at her daughter who had just finished turning it. "For what it's worth," he said. "It isn't worth much right now," Naomi said. "But say it. Your mother was right about every number she ever questioned. I've read them. She was never wrong once." He moved toward the door, one hand on the folding table for balance, then off it, standing on his own. "I authorized a good woman to walk into a fire because I thought I owned the building. I've paid for a lot of things in my life. I haven't paid for that yet." "No," Naomi said. "You haven't." He left through the back, into the Sunday alley behind the laundromat, and the door swung shut on its slow hinge, and the empty machines turned, and the box sat open on the table, with 2 years of her mother's silence spread out under the light. Naomi didn't cry. She had learned somewhere, from Denise, probably, that crying was a thing you did after, when the work was done and the hands were free. Her hands were not free. She folded the color chart along its old creases, the way it wanted to fold, and she put it back in the box with the wristband and the page of codes, and she taped the box shut again, twice around, the way her mother had. Loretta came and stood beside her. She didn't put an arm around her niece, Because Naomi wasn't a woman you held when she was working. She just stood there, close, the folded sheet still against her chest. "You know what you gave away just now," Loretta said. It wasn't a scold, it was a ledger, read out loud. "I know. That man could have opened every locked drawer in that company for you. Handed you your mother's file gift-wrapped. You just told him to walk. I know what he could have handed me." Naomi pressed the last strip of tape flat with her thumb. "I don't want it from the hand that signed the sign-off. Even if the signature's fake. Especially if it's fake. Because a man whose name gets forged onto murder is a man who let his name become worth forging." She looked at the box. "My mother didn't take the settlement. It's in the file. They offered her money to stop and she mailed you a key instead. I'm not going to be the daughter who took what she refused." Loretta was quiet. Then she said, "Denise would have said the same words. Meaner, maybe." "She was meaner than me. By a mile, baby." Loretta finally set the sheet down on the table, its edges square. She'd have made that man stand there another hour just to watch him do it. A breath. But she'd have made the same call. Copies to the doctor. Not a dime from the drawer. Naomi's thumb was still on the tape. "She mailed you a key instead of taking the money," she said, half to herself. She knew she wasn't going to get to use it. That's why it came to you, and not to a lawyer, and not to a reporter. She was betting on the one thing they couldn't buy. She looked up. "You." "I'm not anybody," Loretta said. "I own a laundromat. You own the drawer they never thought to search." Naomi almost smiled, and didn't quite reach it. She knew exactly what she was doing. Upstairs, 40 floors above a different part of the city, the woman who had built the drawer did not know yet that the key existed. But the clock she had started on Sunday was running, and Friday was coming the way Friday always came, and somewhere in a false-named room, a witness she believed she controlled was still breathing. Naomi carried the box to the van. Evelyn drove. Neither of them spoke until they were 3 blocks from the hospital. At a red light, engine idling, the drive with 2 copies of the truth buttoned into Evelyn's coat. "You broke the only alliance that could protect you," Evelyn said. Not a question. A doctor stating a finding. "I broke the alliance that was compromising the evidence." Naomi watched the light. "The files don't need him. My mother made sure of that. She built the key so it would work in any hands, even hands that never met him." "Paper decrypts," Evelyn said. "Paper can also be called forged. They'll say your mother made the key to frame a company she had a grievance with. They'll say I decrypted it to protect a student I favor." She kept her eyes on the road. "I've sat on review boards. I know how they kill a finding they don't want. They don't argue the number. They argue the hand that wrote it. And if the board doesn't believe a student nurse, and a woman who's never billed them $1. Naomi turned the box on her lap so the taped seam faced up, her mother's date in permanent marker looking back at her. "Then, I find the one thing a board can't argue with," she said. "A body that's still warm and saying the same thing the paper says." The light went green. Evelyn didn't ask what she meant. She had spent 30 years reading charts, and she could read the shape of a plan the same way. The entry that didn't close, the number that pointed somewhere the record didn't want you to look. She thought of the older man in the alley the men had brought and not guarded, the one Naomi had described from the storeroom door, rectangular glasses, a worn leather briefcase, walking like a man who'd been given something to keep him quiet. The old one. Servers. Friday. Evelyn pressed the button on her pocket once, feeling the drive still there, and drove her toward the hospital that a dead woman's daughter was about to walk back into, with nothing in her hands but a box her mother had taped shut, and a name she was no longer allowed to trust, and the single stubborn certainty that somewhere in a building full of false charts, there was one chart still breathing. The rehab unit, sat on the 9th floor of a Han-owned tower with no name on the lobby directory, and Naomi walked in wearing the one thing no one there thought to question: teal scrubs. A badge turned just enough that the photo read before the name did. Monday, a little past 9 in the morning. Evelyn had made 2 calls to get the floor. Neither of them used the word patient. The charge nurse looked up. "Transfer review," Naomi said, and set a clipboard on the counter. And the clipboard did what clipboards do in a hospital, which is make a stranger belong. She had one name, not the real one. Evelyn had pulled a false name off the shell company payroll the night before. A resident who drew a monthly stipend from a company that owned nothing, built nothing, existed as a line and a tax number. The old one. She walked the corridor reading door tags until she found it. The man in the bed had rectangular glasses folded on the tray table and a leather briefcase, worn at the corner, tucked against the wall like luggage no one had let him carry out. Kim Dae-won, thinner than the man from the alley, pale in the way of someone kept a half step under, dosed to slow, not to sleep. He turned his head when the door clicked. His eyes found the badge first, then the stethoscope in her pocket, and something in his face loosened by a degree. "You're not theirs," he said. Quiet, careful, a man testing ice. "No. They send someone every morning." He wet his lips. "You're not her." Naomi pulled the chair to the bed and sat, so the two of them were level, so no one passing the glass would read a confrontation. She kept her voice under the hum of the monitor. "I need you to tell me your name, your real one." He watched her a long moment, then he told her. The name matched the man in the alley, the older one, glasses, briefcase, the one Junho had brought and not guarded. The one who'd said servers and Friday, and the old one, never knowing he was naming himself. "They keep you sedated," Naomi said. "Enough to sign." He lifted one hand, and it drifted, unsteady. A man who signs, slowly signs whatever's in front of him. She leaned in. "What have you been signing?" Kim Dae-won told her, in the flat administrative voice of a man who'd spent 30 years inside numbers, and the horror of it lived entirely in how ordinary he made it sound. He was the chief financial officer. 4 years ago, he'd found the same thing Denise found from the other end: settlements paid against claims that had no patience, money leaving through hospitals into companies that treated no one. He'd raised it once. After that, he was consulting. After that, he was here. "The charts," Naomi said. "The false ones. Where does the money go?" "Shells." He nodded at the briefcase against the wall. "I kept the map. They let me keep it. They thought I was too tired to be dangerous." A thin sound that might have been a laugh. Tired men remember. "It's all we do." Naomi looked at the briefcase and did not reach for it yet. "Who signs the suppressions?" "The system signs." His eyes closed, opened. A stamp. A name that isn't a hand. It routes through Haydam and comes out wearing whoever the protocol decides. The president's initials sit on things the president never saw. He found her face again. "You know this. You wouldn't be here otherwise." HTJ on a death certificate. HTJ on the 7th sign-off. A stamp, not a hand. She kept her breathing even. "There's a vote Friday," she said. "To declare him unfit." Dae-won's mouth tightened. 3 doctors, a report, a clock. When he can't answer, the chair moves. And the first thing the new chair does, he lifted 2 fingers toward the window, toward the servers humming somewhere in this same building, is wipe the drawer. Haydam goes dark. The true charts, gone. I go quiet. And what I know becomes a story with no paper under it. Naomi stood and crossed to the wall, and this time she did pick up the briefcase. It was heavier than it looked. "Then you don't stay here until Friday." His face changed. Fear first, the animal kind of a man who'd learned the cost of doors, then something older underneath it. If I leave and it fails, there's nowhere they don't reach. If you stay and it works, you're a name on a page they'll say was coerced. She crouched to his level again. The board can call paper a lie. They can call me a nurse who typed what she wanted. They cannot call you a lie to your face on a live feed. She let that sit. I'm not asking you to run. I'm asking you to be alive on Friday, in a room they don't control, saying what you just said to me. Down the corridor, a cart rattled. Naomi didn't turn. She kept her eyes on his, and she waited, because Evelyn had taught her that the strongest thing in a room is the person willing to say nothing next. Kim Dae-won reached for his glasses. Evelyn moved him that afternoon. On paper first. A transfer order to an outside facility for specialist evaluation, signed by the one attending in the city, whose name the Han board could not paint as bought. By the time the 9th floor understood the resident was gone, he was 2 neighborhoods away, in the same shuttered urgent care, briefcase open on a folding table, mapping shells for a black woman with braided gray hair, who wrote nothing down until she'd read it twice. That was when Soo-jin learned the old one had walked out. Not from Jun-ho, from an empty bed. She came herself, not to the clinic. She never found the clinic. She came to the alley behind Hanul, Tuesday, near dusk, because that was where the trail had gone cold 5 days running, and she was a woman who returned to the last place a thing was true. Naomi was there because Naomi had known she would be. Some part of her had wanted the woman to come to the ground where it started. Dr. Han Soo-jin stood at the mouth of the alley in a wine-colored suit, and the antique brooch caught what light there was, and she looked at Naomi the way a surgeon looks at a complication. "The nursing student," Soo-jin said, not surprised. "Filing. You've cost me a week." You reopened his wound. Naomi didn't move from the storeroom door. You had a doctor cut a healing incision like breaking a seal, and you kept him under so he couldn't tell anyone he was awake. "I kept the company alive." Soo-jin's voice never rose. That was the thing about her. The same smooth register as the man she'd caged, cut from the same cloth of people who never had to shout, because the world had always leaned in. My nephew inherited a chair. He was never built to sit in it. Sentiment, settlements. He'd have opened every drawer in the house to a woman who asked nicely. A pause. One did, years ago. Naomi's hand found her mother's stethoscope in her pocket, the metal warm from her body. "Say her name." "I never knew her name." Soo-jin tilted her head, and there it was, the first true thing, offered like a courtesy. "I knew the number she was pulling. Haydam was mine. I built it while my brother was dying, and my nephew was grieving, and I built it well, and a woman with an audit key found the seam." Something almost like respect crossed her face and left. A doctor raised her dose. I signed the record that closed the room. I did not order a death, a beat. I ordered that it stop being investigated. What it cost to stop it was not a line I asked to see. The alley had gone very quiet. Naomi heard her own pulse in her ears, and under it, the thing she'd carried 2 years, finally put into words by the wrong mouth. "You buried my mother," she said, as a number that didn't close. Soo-jin looked at her then, and understood the surname, and did not flinch, but her stillness changed quality, went from control to calculation, because she was a woman who could feel a floor tilt. "The alley," she said slowly. "He fell here, in your alley." She almost smiled. "There are no coincidences in a house this size, Miss Brooks. There are only the seams we don't see. He fled the one building I owned, that bordered the one hospital, where the one nurse who'd read his skin correctly happened to walk home. A breath. I should have burned the wristband." "You should have," Naomi agreed. Headlights again, but from behind Soo-jin this time, sweeping the alley wall. Not a search car. Evelyn's van, and behind the wheel Evelyn, and beside her a man Soo-jin had declared unfit to think. Soo-jin turned. Whatever she saw in that windshield, she was a strategist first, and she read the board in a glance, and understood she'd already lost the week she'd needed. She did not run. Women like her do not run. She simply walked back into the dark toward the street, unhurried, the brooch winking out, saving the fight for the only room that still mattered. Friday. The boardroom took up a corner of the 40th floor, glass on two sides, the city laid out cold and bright below, and Naomi did not look at the view. She looked at the door, the one behind the empty chair at the head of the table, the only one she hadn't seen anyone open. It opened at 10. Han Tae-jun walked in, immaculate black suit, top buttons open at the collar, and above the collar the dragon rode his neck in full view, where he had spent a decade keeping it under cloth. No overcoat to hide it now, no armed men behind him. Jun-ho was not at his shoulder. He came through the door on his own feet, upright, the way he'd left the laundromat, and the 12 faces around the table did the arithmetic of a ghost arriving on time. Soo-jin sat at the far end, with 3 doctors and a folder. "The president," she said, "has been declared unable to serve. This meeting is a formality." "Then formalize it," Tae-jun said, and took the empty chair, and did not sit like a sick man. "After you hear the record." He didn't run the record. That was the point, and Naomi understood it as she stepped forward with Evelyn's laptop. He could have stood there and defended his own name, and every hand in the room would have heard a boss protecting his chair. So he sat, and he let the 2 people the house had never paid do the talking. Evelyn spoke first, credentials plain, and connected the feed. Then Naomi laid it out the way she'd been trained to lay out a chart at the bedside. No adjectives, no story, just the sequence. Each thing setting up the next. The wristband, its code. She put the strip of it on the table and the decoded string on the screen beside it. Hatem, and a shelf, and a number. The true chart against the false chart. Side by side, the patient, who recovered on the page shown to auditors and did not recover in the drawer. The 7th sign-off, HTJ, stamped, and beside it, pulled from Hatem's own routing log that Kim Dae-won's map had unlocked, the timestamp, a suppression signed at 3:40 in the morning from a terminal on the 40th floor, on a night the president's own travel record placed him 9 time zones away. A name that was not a hand. The incapacity report, its date, the 5-day clock, drawn from a Sunday, aimed at this exact Friday, and the death certificate, Denise Brooks, cause of death, blacked out, same 3 initials, same stamp, same protocol. Naomi put it last, and she put it up without changing her voice, and the not changing was the loudest thing in the room. "This is a reconstruction by a student," said one of the 3 doctors, "typed by the person telling the story." "Yes," Naomi said, "so don't take it from me." Evelyn opened the feed. Kim Dae-won's face filled the screen, glasses on, briefcase visible behind him, alert in a way no one in that room had seen him in a year. He confirmed it line by line. The shells, the map, the stipend paid to a resident who didn't exist, the plan to wipe the servers the moment the chair changed hands. He named the doctor who raised the dose. He named the terminal. He was not coerced, and he was not tired, and he was, unmistakably, alive. The room turned, slowly, the way rooms turn, toward the woman with the brooch. Soo-jin did not deny it. That was her last dignity, and she took it. "I built what the house needed," she said, "and I would build it again." She looked at her nephew. "You'd have given it all away." "I'd have given away the part that was killing people," Tae-jun said. "Yes." The board suspended her within the hour, the 3 doctors with her. Not a vote of confidence, a vote of removal, and then a second motion, because a room that has just watched itself nearly commit a crime moves fast to prove it can. The accounts feeding the shells were frozen by end of day. Evelyn stood at the front, and named the one condition Naomi had made her promise to carry. Freeze the money, not the medicine. Not one patient account, not one ward, not one drug order stopped moving. The rot got cut. The body kept breathing. They asked Naomi to stay. They offered her things. A name in the room said the word compensation, and then the word position, and then a number. Naomi thought of her mother mailing a key to a laundromat instead of a lawyer, refusing the settlement, betting on the one thing they couldn't buy. She thought of the overdue scholarship notice on the counter above Loretta's machines. "No," she said, "my mother refused your money. I'm not going to be the one who finally took it." What she asked for instead she'd written on a single page. An independent channel, outside Haydom, outside the house, answerable to no one at that table, where a person who found a number that didn't close could report it and not disappear for 4 years into a bed with a false name. She asked that it carry a name: Denise Brooks. The board, wanting badly to be seen doing the right thing, gave her the easy yes. She finished the degree that spring. Loretta came, front row, gold earrings and a printed dress, and cried the way she hadn't let herself cry in the laundromat. Evelyn hooded her. Naomi took a post that paid a third of what the 40th floor had offered: patient safety, the unglamorous work of reading charts before they became certificates, of flagging the interaction at bed 9 before the fall, and she carried her mother's stethoscope in the pocket of a new coat and used it because it had always been meant to be used. Taejun she saw once more, and it was in the alley. They'd put a light in it, a real one, on the wall above the storeroom door. City ordered after an incident report no one ever connected to the Han name. It burned white over the ground where he'd bled, where she'd carried him, where a woman in a wine suit had learned a surname too late. He stood under it in the black suit, dragon bare above the collar. No men, no watch he needed to check. "You could have run every part of that yourself," she said. "In the room, you let us." "A boss defending his chair," he said, "is a boss." He looked at the light, then at her. "I wanted them to see it wasn't mine to defend, it was yours." She didn't offer her hand, and he didn't reach for hers. They had never been that, and they both knew it, and the not pretending was the closest thing to honesty either of them had ever handed the other. "Your mother was right," he said, "about every number she ever questioned. I authorized the door she walked through. I told myself that made me innocent." He was quiet a moment. "It made me the man who held it open and looked away." Naomi looked at him a long time. The rain had come and gone from that alley 100 times since the first night. The blood was long washed off the stone. "Surviving isn't the same as deserving trust," she said. "No," he said, "it isn't." She turned and walked out toward the street, into the light, and she did not look back, and behind her, a man who had finally learned the difference stood alone in an alley that no longer needed the dark. The new badge photographed her the way all hospital cameras do, flat and unforgiving, and Naomi clipped it to the teal scrub without checking the picture. Patient safety, it read, under her name. She had been in the role 11 weeks. Long enough to learn which supply closets locked on their own and which senior nurses tested her before they trusted her. Short enough that the stethoscope around her neck still surprised her when it swung against the ID. She was on the 4th floor before the day shift finished counting narcotics. A chart had been flagged overnight, and the flag was hers to read now, not to raise and hope someone listened. That was the part nobody had warned her about. The authority. It sat on her differently than the fear used to. Bed 12, post-op 71, 2 medications that did not belong in the same 12 hours. She pulled the record, and her thumb found the order, and she stopped. The dose was wrong. Not dangerously, not yet. Off by a decimal that a tired hand could have entered, and a tired eye could have signed. She traced it back through the chart, the way her mother had taught her to trace anything that did not close. Who entered it? Who verified it? What time? What terminal? She did not escalate it to the ward first. She fixed the order, then she walked it to the prescriber in person, chart open, finger on the line. "This," she said. "Look." The resident looked. Young, careful. Not the one from 2 years ago in the other hospital who had laughed at her. This one went pale in the honest way, the way of someone who understood exactly what a decimal could do to a lung. "I entered that at 4 in the morning," he said. "I know, that's why I'm standing here and not writing you up." He signed the correction. She watched his hand until the pen lifted. Then she logged it, not as a punishment, but as a number, in the place where numbers were supposed to live now. "You could have written me up," he said before she left. "The old safety officer would have. The old safety officer is why 3 of you are afraid to enter anything after 2 a.m., she said. "Fear makes worse charts than fatigue. Enter it right the first time. That's the whole job." He nodded. She saw him breathe out. She had watched a lot of people breathe out this year, in rooms where they had expected to be punished and were asked to be careful instead. It changed a person's hands. It changed what they were willing to tell you next time. Exhale. She was building something one exhale at a time, and she knew exactly how fragile it was, because she had built the whole thing on a promise that the reporting would not eat the reporter. By 10, she was in the basement, in the office they had given the program, which was really a converted records room with the shelving still bolted to 2 walls. On the door, a small plate, the Denise Brooks patient safety line. She had argued about the wording for 3 meetings. The board wanted independent office. She wanted the name where a person walking past would have to read it and wonder who Denise Brooks was. The line was not a phone. It was a channel, a way in, a place a nurse or a clerk or a frightened resident could send a number that did not close without it routing through anyone who might want it buried. It sat outside the house. It sat outside Haydom, which existed now only as evidence in a sealed server nobody was allowed to wipe. Evelyn had insisted on that. Freeze the money, not the medicine, and never, ever the record. 3 submissions waited in the queue. Naomi read them the way she read skin. 2 were nothing, a miscount that reconciled. A frightened clerk who had misread her own spreadsheet. Naomi answered both by hand, kindly, because a program that made people feel stupid for reporting would starve inside a month. The 3rd was not nothing. A billing code from a rehabilitation contractor, one of the outfits the Empire still used because dismantling a supply chain took longer than dismantling a lie. A patient discharged as recovered. A 2nd entry, days later, in a different ledger that did not agree with the first. Different outcome. The oldest trick in the drawer, wearing a new sleeve. She sat with it. She did not call Evelyn, not yet. She built the thing first, the way she had learned, so that when she carried it up, she carried a fact and not a feeling. She opened both ledgers on the same screen and laid the columns beside each other. Discharge date, outcome field, billing cycle. The first record said recovered and stopped. The second kept going, quietly, the way money keeps going after a body has been declared finished with it. She did not let herself feel the thing rising in her chest. She had trained that out of her hands. A shaking hand made an ugly line, and an ugly line was easy for a lawyer to call hysteria, so she breathed the way she had taught the resident to breathe, and she typed the timestamps in clean, and she let the columns say it instead of her mouth. It took 40 minutes. When she finished, she read it back once, cold, the way an enemy would read it, hunting for the loose thread they would pull to unravel her. She found 2 soft places, and she hardened them. Then she saved it in 2 locations, because that was law now, in her hands, the way it had once been law in the hands of a woman who kept a drive buttoned in a coat. Her phone lit at noon, a number she had assigned to one contact and one only. Kim Dae-won. He was allowed to call her. That had been a condition too, written into his protection, the way medical calls had once been written into an alliance she had since broken and never rebuilt. He lived in a city she had never named to anyone, under his own name again, thinner than a man his age should be, growing a little heavier each month as the sedation left his blood for good. "You found something," he said, not a question. He had learned to read her silences over a live feed in front of 12 board members, and a person did not forget a room like that. "A billing code," she said. "Rehab contractor, 2 ledgers. Send me the shell name." She sent it. She heard him breathe, the slow, careful breath of a man whose lungs had been kept quiet against their will for too long. "That one I know," he said. "It was on my map. It was supposed to be closed. It's billing again." Then someone reopened it. Or it was never as closed as the paper said. Naomi wrote the sentence down. Someone reopened it. She had learned to distrust the word closed. She had learned it in a laundromat, over a folding table, with her mother's handwriting correcting her mother's own key. "I'll testify to it," Dae-won said. "If it comes to that. You know I will." "I know. They tried to make me disappear inside a chart," he said. "The least a chart can do now is speak for me. Send me the cycle dates. I'll match them against the map before you take it up. If it's the same hand, I'll see it. I always saw it. That was the problem in the end. I saw it and I said it once, out loud, in the wrong room. You're saying it in the right rooms now. Because you built rooms that were safe to say it in." A dry sound, almost a laugh, from a man who had not had much to laugh about. "You know what that is worth, in that company? A room where the truth doesn't cost you your name. Your mother died looking for one. You made one out of a records closet in a basement." "Naomi," he paused. In the pause, she heard the man who had said her name in a sedated whisper on the 9th floor of a tower with no name on it, when he was not yet sure she was not one of them. "The last time you found a number that didn't close, it cost you a year of your life." "It cost me more than a year," she said. "But not this time. This time I have a door that opens." She ended the call and looked at the door with her mother's name on it, and she did not let herself make it into a speech, not even inside her own head. She stood, she took the file, and she went up. Evelyn was in the physician's lounge with her glasses pushed into her braids and a coffee she had let go cold, which meant she had been reading something that mattered. She looked up, and she read Naomi's face before Naomi opened the folder. "How bad?" Evelyn said. "Not bad yet. That's the point of catching it now." Evelyn took the pages. She read the way she always read, once fast for shape and once slow for teeth. When she reached the second ledger, her jaw set. "Same architecture," she said. 2 truths, one for the auditor. "A contractor, not the house, but the house pays the contractor. The house pays everyone." Evelyn set the pages down. "You built this clean?" 2 ledgers side by side. Timestamps. The shell name, Dae-won, confirmed. "Nothing that needs anybody to trust me." Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. "Your mother would have needed 6 months and no protection to get this far. You did it in a morning with a badge that lets you stand in the room." Naomi did not answer that. "Some things you let land without covering them." "Take it to compliance," Evelyn said. "Real compliance, the one we rebuilt, not the ghost. And copy the line, 2 places." "It's in 2 already," Naomi said. And something crossed Evelyn's face, because that had been Evelyn's own line once, in a laundromat, with a drive buttoned into a pocket. Neither of them said it out loud. The phrase had done its work once. It did not need saying twice. The compliance office was on 11, glass on one side, and the man who ran it had been hired after the suspensions, from outside the house, which was the only reason he had the job. He heard Naomi out without interrupting, which was itself a small revolution in that building. When she finished, he asked the one question that mattered. Is anyone being harmed right now? A patient was discharged as recovered who may not have been. I don't have the person yet. I have the paper. Then we find the person before we fight the paper. He reached for his phone. That's the order. Person first. Naomi felt something loosen in her chest that she had not known was clenched. Person first. It was a small sentence. It was the whole thing. 2 years ago, she said, a number like this went to a room like this, and the room asked who benefits before it asked who's bleeding. And a woman spent the last months of her life trying to answer the wrong question because the room had taught her that was the only one it would hear. The man behind the desk looked at the plate on her badge, then at her face. I read the file when I was hired, he said. The whole thing. It's why I took the job. He turned the phone toward her. So, person first. Show me who I'm calling. She showed him. They worked the shell name backward through the contracted facilities, and it was slow, and it was clerical, and there was no drama in it at all, and that was the point. Drama was what happened when a thing was caught too late. Paperwork, done in daylight by 2 people who did not have to hide, was what catching it in time looked like. It looked like nothing. It looked like a Tuesday. They found her by 3, a woman 2 states away, discharged from a contracted facility, coded as recovered, still symptomatic according to a home health nurse who had flagged it into the line herself, and been one of Naomi's morning nothings that turned out to be a something after all. The systems had not talked to each other. Now they did, because a channel existed that made them. By 4, the contractor's billing was frozen on that account, and only that account. The woman kept her care. That had been the whole architecture of the thing, worked out in a boardroom by a nurse who refused a chair at the table and asked instead for a channel with her mother's name on it. Freeze the money, never the medicine. Naomi walked out at 7 into a spring evening that had not been cold in weeks. The alley behind Hanol had lights now, white ones, wall-mounted, installed by municipal order after an incident report that a woman in teal scrubs had once filed against her own hospital, and won. She did not take the alley home most nights. She took it tonight. He was there. She had known he might be, the way you know weather. Han Tae-jun stood near the mouth of it, where the old dark used to pool, and no longer could, the dragon at his collar plain under the new light. He held nothing in his hands. He never brought anyone anymore. That had been a promise, and it was one of the few he had kept from the beginning to now. I heard you caught one today, he said. News travels. Not the details, just that the line worked. He watched her. I wanted to hear it from you. That it worked. It worked. He nodded, slow. He did not step closer, and she noted that he had learned that too. The exact distance a person is allowed to keep and no more. I don't fund it, he said. I want to be sure you still know that. It runs on operating budget the board can't touch without a vote, and my name isn't on the line to it anywhere. I know. I read the ledger every month myself. Of course you do. Almost a smile, and then not. You'd be a fool not to. I taught you that, in the worst possible way. My mother taught me that. You just showed me why she was right. He took that the way she had taken Evelyn's earlier, without covering it. The light hummed faintly overhead, the sound of an alley that no longer needed the dark and had not yet gotten used to being seen. I'm not here to ask for anything, he said. I didn't think you were. I'm here because a patient 2 states away is going to sleep tonight, still getting care she needs, and she'll never know your name, and she'll never know your mother's. And I thought at least one person in this city should stand where it started and say it out loud. He looked at the wall where the light was bolted. So, Denise Brooks, because of her, and because of you, someone who will never hear either name is alive and cared for tonight. Naomi held very still. She had not braced for that. She had braced for apology, which she did not want, or for money, which she would refuse, or for the old gravity that used to pull the air between them tight. She had not braced for him to simply say her mother's name into the light, like a fact that had finally been allowed out of the dark. "That's the first true thing you've said to me that didn't cost you anything," she said. "No," he said. "It cost me plenty. It's just that this time, I paid it before I opened my mouth." She almost laughed. She let herself, a little, because the alley was lit and the woman 2 states away was breathing, and the resident this morning had signed the correction with his own tired hand. "You survived," she said. "I did. That used to be the only thing you were good at." It was. He put his hands in his pockets, an ordinary gesture, a man's gesture, nothing of the boss in it. "I'm trying to be good at the other thing now, the one where surviving isn't the point." "How's it going?" Slowly. This time, the smile stayed. He looked down the lit passage, at the bright corners where nothing could gather anymore. "Some mornings, I still catch myself measuring exits in a room, counting who I'd have to get past. It's an old muscle. It doesn't know the war is over." He shook his head. "Then I make myself sit in the chair and stay in the room, and let the meeting be boring. That's the practice. Staying in the boring room. That's the practice," she agreed. Slowly, he said again. "Your mother would have hated me." "She would have investigated you," Naomi said. "That's different. She only hated the numbers." He looked at her for a long moment, and whatever he had come to find in the alley, he seemed to have found it, because he stepped back, not toward her, giving her the mouth of the passage and the street beyond it. "Good night, Ms. Brooks." "Good night." She walked out toward the street, into the white light and past it into the ordinary glow of the avenue, and this time she was not walking away from something in the dark. She was walking home. Above her aunt's laundromat there was a room, and in the room there was no longer an overdue scholarship notice on the counter, because the degree was finished, and the notice was paid, and the counter held a photograph instead, a woman with almond eyes and a light blouse, who had mailed a box before she died, and bet everything on the one person no one thought to search. Naomi's fingers found the stethoscope as she walked, the way they had found it 400 times in a darker version of this same walk. It was warm from the day. She had used it 11 times since morning. She would use it again tomorrow and the day after, in a building that still had the family's name on the cardiac wing and would carry it for years, because a name on a wall was not the same as a name in a drawer, and she had learned, at a terrible price, to tell the two apart. At the corner, she stopped and looked back once. The alley was lit and empty. He had gone. The white lights held the passage in plain sight, every corner of it visible, nothing left to hide behind, and she understood that this was the only ending she had ever actually wanted. Not the fall of the woman who built the lie, not the man in the alley finally learning the difference. Just this, a place that used to swallow people, now bright enough that the next person who bled there would be seen. She turned toward home, and the stethoscope settled against her chest, over the badge with her mother's work in it, and she carried both up the stairs into the light of a room that was finally, entirely, her own. The call came before the badge readers were awake. Naomi was at the basement desk with her coat still on, one arm out of the sleeve, when the phone under the lamp lit up with a number she'd seen only twice. Kim Dae-won never called at 6. He called at noon, on his own clock, after his own coffee, in the careful way of a man who had learned that being alive was a schedule you kept quietly. "They opened another one," he said, no greeting. "The shell we closed in April. Someone paid a filing fee on it Tuesday." She sat. The other arm came out of the coat slow. "You're sure it's the same one?" "It's the same tax line. I built the tax line." A man remembers the ones he built. A pause on his end, The sound of a spoon against a cup, 2 states away. I wouldn't call if it were nothing. You taught me a nothing, looks like a something, until you read it twice. I taught you that. You told it to a submission. I was listening on the other side of the wall you built. Another spoon. Read it twice, Miss Brooks, then read it a third time before you climb any stairs. She wrote the tax line on the pad, under the lamp, in the block hand her mother had used for numbers that mattered. Then she thanked him, and he was gone the way he always went. No goodbye, just absence, a man conserving what he had. The office was a converted records room, and it still smelled like the boxes that used to live there, paper and dust, and the ghost of a machine that once shredded for a living. On the wall, the plate that said what the room was now. She looked at the name on it for 1 second, the way she did every morning, and then she stopped looking, because looking too long was a thing the dead didn't need and the living couldn't afford. The first submission of the day was waiting in the queue. She'd learned to open the queue before the coffee, before the coat came all the way off, because the ones that mattered came in overnight, typed by people who couldn't sleep for the same reason her mother once couldn't. 2 were noise, a miscount that reconciled itself by the second page, a clerk who'd read a room number as a dose. She wrote back to both by hand, kind, quick, because a person who reaches into the dark and finds nothing there still reached, and the reaching was the thing you protected. The third one had a body inside it. Not a corpse, a person, a woman, 79, discharged from a contract rehab wing 3 weeks ago, with a chart that used a word Naomi had come to hate more than any other in the language. Recovered. The submission was from the woman's granddaughter, who had typed it at 4 in the morning and apologized twice for wasting anyone's time, and then laid out, without knowing what she was laying out, the exact architecture Denise had died reading. One ledger said the grandmother walked out on her own. A second entry, days later, in a system that shouldn't have touched the first, said something that did not agree. 2 verdicts for one woman, the lie wearing the shape of a fact. She read the granddaughter's words a second time, the way Daewon had told her to. The girl had written that her grandmother still couldn't lift the arm, still couldn't sleep flat, still asked when the next appointment was for a treatment that a piece of paper somewhere insisted had already worked. She'd written that the doctors she called were kind and said the file was closed. She'd written, at the very end, in a line that had no business hurting as much as it did, that she was probably being paranoid and sorry again for the trouble. Naomi read that line a third time, the apology. The reflex of a person who had been taught that doubting a record was a form of bad manners. Her mother had never learned that manners. That was the thing that had made her mother dangerous, and the thing that had gotten her mother killed, and the thing, in the end, that had built the room Naomi now sat in. Naomi built the case cold. She'd learned not to feel it while she built it, because feeling it made the hand shake, and the hand had to be still, the way you keep a hand still over a wound you are teaching someone else to hold. 2 ledgers side by side, timestamps. The shell's name, the one Daewon had spoken into the phone before the sun. She hardened the 2 soft places a lawyer would push on, and she saved it in 2 places, because a truth that lives in one place is a truth someone can close. She was still saving when Evelyn found her. "You've got the look," Evelyn said from the doorway, glasses pushed up, coat over her arm. "Your mother had it. She'd get quiet like that, and I'd know somebody upstairs was about to have a bad week." The April shell reopened, the one Daewon mapped. He called at 6. Evelyn came in and read the screen over her shoulder, and for a while she said nothing at all, which from Evelyn was its own kind of speaking. "Same architecture," she said finally. 2 verdicts. You take this to real compliance, not the one that used to answer that phone. And you copy the line. It's in 2. Evelyn looked at her, and something passed between them that had no words for it and needed none. The same 3 words that had written a drive in a buttoned pocket once, back when the buttoning still meant fear. Now it meant a habit. Habits were how you survived the thing you'd survived. The compliance office on 11 had glass on one wall now, glass where there used to be a locked door, and the man behind the desk had been hired from outside after the suspensions cleared the old chairs. He was reading when she came in, and he kept reading her file when she set it down, all the way to the last page, the way he'd told her once he read every file, because reading every file was the reason he'd taken a job at a house that had recently learned the cost of not reading them. "Is anyone being harmed right now?" he said. Not a question he asked to sound careful, a question he asked because the answer changed what happened next. "She's still symptomatic, discharged as recovered. Person first." He was already reaching for the phone. "We find her before we find the money. Always." She'd braced, the first weeks, for the other version of that man, the one who'd sat in that chair before the suspensions, the one who answered a chart with a policy and a policy with a shrug. She kept waiting for this one to become that one. He hadn't. He read the whole file every time, and he asked the same question every time, and the question was always about the body in the bed and never about the exposure to the house. She'd asked him once why he'd taken the job. He'd said he read the whole story before he signed, meaning the vote, meaning the frozen accounts, meaning the dead woman whose name was on a door in the basement, and that a house that had learned that lesson at that price was the only house worth working for. She hadn't fully believed him then. She was starting to. 2 states, she said now. The discharge routed through a contractor. The billing's clean on its face. It only breaks if you lay the second ledger next to the first. Then lay them. He put the call on speaker so she could hear the wing pick up on the far end. "And stay on the line while I do. I want a nurse's ears on this, not a lawyer's." They found her by 3, a home health nurse, the kind of small, brave woman who signs her own name to a doubt, had flagged the grandmother's chart from 2 states away, and the flag had traveled a road that hadn't existed 2 years ago, a road with a dead woman's name on the sign. Systems that had never spoken to each other spoke, because someone had built a room where they could. By 4, the contract billing was frozen on that one account only, and the woman kept every hour of care she was owed. Freeze the money, never the medicine. It was a rule now. Rules were how the living kept faith with the dead. Daewon called back at 4:15, off his own clock, which told her how much it had cost him to close that gap. "They didn't reopen it to hide a patient," he said. "They reopened it to see if anyone was still watching. A test. Somebody wanted to know if the room you built has a person in it after hours." "There's a person in it." "I know." Something in his voice that was almost, not quite, warm. "That's what I'll tell them if they ask me again. That there's a person in the room now. Your mother went looking for that room and never found it. You didn't find it either. A breath. You made it." She held the phone a moment after he was gone. The vote had been a year ago and more. The sister suspended, the doctors suspended, the accounts frozen without a single patient losing a single hour, and Naomi had thought, in the way you think a thing to survive the size of it, that the ending was the ending. But endings weren't rooms you closed. They were rooms you kept the lights on in. Somebody had walked down the hall at 3 in the morning to jiggle the handle, and the handle had held, because she'd been at the desk with her coat half off, because a man 2 states away kept a schedule of tax lines in his head, because a nurse who'd never met either of them had signed her name to a doubt. At 7, she climbed the basement stairs and went out the service door into the alley. The lights were still there, white, municipal, mounted on the wall after an incident report a lifetime ago, and the dark that used to own the space no longer had a lease on it. She stood a moment where she'd once knelt over a bleeding man and read his skin like a chart nobody else could open. He was there. Of course he was there. He came sometimes, and never inside, never past the line the alley drew, a man who had learned where his rooms ended. The dragon rode above his collar the way it always would now, no collar high enough to bury it again. He stood with his hands at his sides and no men behind him, which was the only way he came anymore, which was the whole of what he'd changed, or the visible part of it. "I heard the line worked today," he said. "You hear a lot for a man who doesn't fund it. I don't fund it." He said it the way you confirm a fact you're glad is true. "It runs on the operating budget the board can't touch without a vote. My name is nowhere on the ledger for it. That was the condition. I keep the condition." The April shell reopened. His jaw moved once. "Who found it?" "Day one." "Then a nurse, 2 states from here, who never heard your name or mine." She let that sit in the white light. "A woman kept her care today, 79. She'll never know any of this happened. That's the part I like best, that she'll never know." "That's the part you like best," he repeated, quiet, testing the shape of it. "Your mother would have liked that part too." "Don't tell me what my mother would have liked." No. He accepted it without flinching, the way he accepted most things now, a man who'd stopped bracing for blows because he'd learned some of them were owed. "You're right. I don't get to say it." The lights hummed. Somewhere past the alley, the city did what the city did, indifferent and enormous, and the two of them stood inside a square of white that hadn't existed when this began. "They didn't reopen it for money," she said. "Day one thinks it was a test, somebody wanting to know if the rooms still watched after hours." Something crossed his face, brief, and she read it the way she read everything, the old training that never left. Not fear, calculation, the reflex of a man who had spent 40 years reading exits. He caught himself doing it. She watched him catch himself. "You still count the doors," she said. "Every room I walk into." He didn't soften it. "I count them before I know I'm counting. I don't leave through them anymore. That's the difference, I can promise. Not that I stopped seeing the exit, that I stay in the boring room with my hands, where people can see them." A pause. "I sat in a 2-hour budget review Tuesday. Line by line. I wanted to walk out of my own skin. I stayed. That's the bar now, sitting in a chair. For a man who used to solve a problem by making it disappear," he said, "sitting in a chair is the whole discipline. And when the chair doesn't fix it, then it doesn't get fixed by me, and I have to live in a house with a problem in it." He said it flat, a man reciting a discipline he was still learning by heart. "That's new. I spent my whole life not living with problems. You made them disappear, or they made you disappear." There wasn't a third door. He looked at the white light overhead, as if he could still remember the alley without it. "There's a third door now. It's boring, and it's slow, and half the time the problem outlives you sitting there. I sit there anyway." She almost smiled. She didn't let it land. There were things she would give him and things she wouldn't, and the line between them was the line her mother had drawn without ever knowing she'd have a daughter to keep it. "She'd have hated me," he said, not fishing, just naming it. "No." Naomi shook her head, slow. "She'd have investigated you. She wouldn't have wasted a whole feeling on hate. She'd have pulled your numbers and read them twice, and told you exactly which line didn't close." The white light caught the edge of the stethoscope at her chest. Her mother's, used 11 times that day, worn smooth by 2 women's hands now. She only ever hated the numbers, never the people. She thought people could be read. She thought if you read them carefully enough, you could catch it in time. Her voice didn't break. She'd earned the steadiness. She was catching it in time when it caught her first. He was quiet a long moment. When he spoke, it was lower, the register a man uses for the truest thing he owns. "I held the door open," he said. "I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it, because it's the only sentence I'm sure of. I didn't raise the dose. I didn't stamp the death. But I built the door and I authorized the woman to walk through it, and then I looked at something else while she was inside, surviving that, being alive at the end of it, reinstated, sitting in my chair. It isn't the same as deserving anything. He met her eyes. It isn't the same as deserving trust. No, she said. It isn't. It was the second time either of them had said it in that alley, and it would be the last, because some sentences you say once to learn and once to keep, and after that, saying them again just wears them down to nothing. "Good night, Miss Brooks," he said. "Good night." He turned first. This time, she noticed that. For a long while, it had been her who turned first. Her who walked into the light without looking back, leaving him in the last of the dark he still carried. Tonight, he turned first, into the street, hands visible, no men, a man walking toward a chair he'd promised to sit in. She watched him go 3 steps, and then she stopped watching, because watching too long was a thing neither the dead nor the living needed from her. She went up the alley toward home, through the white light that had been dark, past the dumpster where she'd knelt, and none of it grabbed at her the way it used to. A place is only what happened there until you make it something else. She'd made it something else. It had taken a year and a program and a woman 2 states away who kept her care, but she'd made it a place you walked through, not a place that happened to you. Above the laundromat, the window was lit. Loretta had left it on. The scholarship notice was long paid, a paid stamp on it in a drawer somewhere, kept the way you keep the proof of a thing you survived. On the counter, her mother's photograph, Denise in the feminine suit, the reading glasses, the almond eyes that Naomi met every morning and every night now without flinching, because a face on a counter was a face you kept, not a name in a drawer that somebody hoped you'd forget. She climbed the stairs slow. The stethoscope settled against her, over the badge, over the day's 11 uses of it, over the ledger of small saved hours nobody would ever count. She thought, once, at the top of the stairs, of the difference her mother had spent her life reading. A name on a wall was a thing money bought. The cardiac wing downstairs still carried the family's name and would for years, carved deep, well-lit, admired. A name in a drawer was a thing money buried, the causa appagata, the blacked-out line, the death that wore a stamp of initials no living hand had pressed. Her whole work now lived in the gap between those two, the difference her mother had known and died knowing, the difference Naomi had learned at a folding table with a color key in her mother's hand. And there was a third thing now, a thing her mother hadn't lived to see, a name on a door. Not bought, not buried, earned. A door in a basement with the lights on behind it, and a person in the room after hours, so that when someone walked down the hall at 3 a.m. to test the handle held. She let herself in. The room was warm and it was hers, entirely hers, and the light was the kind you leave on for someone you love coming home, except she was the one it had been left on for, and she was home. And there was nothing left in the alley behind her that needed the dark. She set the stethoscope on the counter beside the photograph, the way her mother had set hers down at the end of a shift, and she looked at the two of them there in the lamplight for exactly as long as the living are allowed. Then she turned off nothing. She left the light on. Tomorrow the queue would fill again overnight, typed by people who couldn't sleep, and one of them, maybe, would be reaching into the dark and finding a room there, a room with a person in it, a room her mother had died looking for and never found. She had made it. That was the whole of it. That was the difference. Kept. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Tell me, my loves, have you ever carried the truth about someone you loved, buried in a file no one would open? Have you ever carried the truth about someone you loved? Have you ever carried the truth about someone you loved? Mark my words, the moment you stop confusing survival with the right to be trusted, everything changes. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments, we read them all. And if you believe in stories about truth, dignity, and legacy, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.